Listeners everywhere, welcome to the Movie Show with Joel and Ryan, the weekly fix for your screen addiction and a trusted source for discussion of all things film and television. Please keep in mind that for the purposes of this podcast, Joel and Ryan are not acting as journalists, but rather fellow moving picture enthusiasts. All of their opinions should be taken as such. Also, please be warned that while Joel and Ryan may seem like petulant children, they are, in fact, adults who may occasionally use adult language. While they promise to bleep out all the worst words, it's a good bet you will still understand what they were saying. And now, with no further ado, here's Joel and Ryan.
So vote once, vote twice for Bill McKay, you middle-class honkies. It's the Movie Show with Joel and Ryan. How you doing?
Twice for what?
Vote twice for Bill McKay, you middle-class honkies.
That's right. I wanted to make sure that got out there because it was a little obscured by the music.
Oh, I'm sure it was. Yes, welcome to the Movie Show. I am Joel.
And I'm Ryan.
And we're super happy that you're joining us once again this week for a little trip back into the super swinging 70s. We'll get to that in a moment, though. One thing real quick. I didn't tell you about this, Ryan. So, but I don't think you'll mind. We do want to give a quick the Movie Show with Joel and Ryan get well soon shout out to a good friend of the show, Rob Dunkelberger. He's spending a couple days in the hospital, getting some things looked at, and hopefully he'll be back up on his feet very soon here. But I just want him to know that we're thinking about him. Hope he's doing better.
Yeah. We need him back. So so miracles of modern medicine.
Yeah.
Fix Rob up and get him back for us. We need him.
Yep. He's too good to be stuck in a hospital bed. All right. We love you, Rob. And hopefully frankly, I know that you're behind a couple episodes and you need to catch up. And so hopefully you're listening to this and you're already home, frankly.
Yeah.
So, all right. So the Movie Show with Joel and Ryan this week. So last week we decided to put together, and Ryan had sort of gone down. You kind of went down a 1970s rabbit hole. Is that kind of what happened?
Sort of. I had collected all these movies that I had for a while, and I hadn't seen any of them. Same with the 60s. You could probably expect that show to come at some point. But yeah, so there wasn't, it's hard to explain, but there was an extra week in the year from how I normally schedule movies. Like suddenly this extra week showed up because of the Oscars getting pushed off and the NFL draft being like a week later. And so all of that conspired to have this free week that I had to schedule. And so I'm like, I went over several options, but what I settled on was the 70s. So I watched 2 or 3 of those films we talked about, and a couple we'll talk about tonight, a night, basically. I just spent my time sort of catching up on them and checking them off my list. And, I have this whole crazy movie routine that is very satisfying to me. And I knew there were really good movies in there. So, I was saving them for a rainy day, and suddenly like it just had bonus week of 2021.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, well, I'll do it now. That'll catch up with me at some point. And some things I'll have to delete a week later because there aren't real bonus weeks on the calendar. Yeah. It's more just where this week fell in the land, amongst the landmarks of this time of year.
Right.
So yeah, I watched them all, and we talked about most of them. But it was awesome watching Scarecrow, watching they shoot horses, don't they? A few of these things just for the very first time. Even though I had a pretty decent idea of what they were, was super rewarding. It was really strange. You don't get to go back and watch, you don't get to go back and watch stuff like that for the first time ever again. It's sort of neat. It's weird that I hadn't seen some of them, but it's sort of neat that I hadn't, because a lot of the films we talked about last week, and plenty of them this week, were it's cool to see them when your maturity level sort of is at a stage where you can appreciate them best.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I think a lot of those smarter films from the 80s even, but definitely from the 70s, where they were just making a sort of different kind of film. Like, you can see those when you're a kid and they can make an impression, and that impression sort of stays with you. And then if you check them out through the years, or even if you just think back on them, like, they grow with you, sort of, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
But just, being an old guy who longs for some sort of nostalgia in that way, and then to be hit with this super quality storytelling was, even the sillier ones, even the big war movies and the silly epics that aren't 70s really at all in the way they feel, were great in that way, and that I could appreciate them for what they were, and compared to a lifetime of watching other movies of that kind. Like, It was cool.
Yeah. I would agree with you. Yeah, that was the big thing. Some of the movies I watched, a couple that we talked about last week, because it was that same sort of thing. The last time I had seen them, I had, some of them probably were like college, that I probably watched for a film class or something.
Mm-hmm.
And or others, and others were just like, oh yeah, I think I've seen that, or and some of them from my childhood that, like, my dad decided to watch on a Saturday afternoon. But yeah, so it was nice to sort of revisit a couple of those. And same with this week. This week we have a bunch of movies here. Some of them, for me personally, some of them I haven't seen, and some of them I haven't seen for a very long time.
Yeah, unlike last week's list, there's 4 of them or so on here that I still haven't seen, that you got on the list. So I'll be interested to hear about those. Right,
a couple of them, and we'll get to them. A couple of them I was not able to, they're not available to watch unless you own, they're the kind that they're available. They're not even available on Blu-ray. They're available on DVD,
some old DVD,
old DVDs, or some of them you can even still find VHS tapes of these. So, but I think they're worth mentioning, because they're once they do become available, I think they would be. Hopefully someday they will become available, because they're some really fun films.
For sure.
All right. Well, why don't we jump to it, Ryan? Why don't we get on into taking a trip back to the super cinema of the 70s?
We're gonna have a party.
Yes, we are.
Inviting all our friends.
That's you.
We're gonna have a real good time.
You are here. You
I
are part of
hope
the
it
family.
never ends. Makes me wanna say, didn't do do do.
Yeah.
Didn't do.
They're out there, Movie Show with Joel and Ryan listeners, the people making funky, rights-free R&B and soul music.
That is
Those
right.
guys are awesome. Whoever made that one.
What is that one called? That is it's called Everybody's Party, and
Everybody's Party. I like
I believe
that
that's
too.
what it is.
Instead of Everybody Party, it's called Everybody's Party.
Well, let me just double check here. I could be wrong.
No, that's true. I know that.
Yep. No, Everybody's Party. BJ Block and Don Pemberton. Thank you.
Thanks.
Rights-free music website that I found. But
we appreciate it. It's just what we needed, was some cool rights-free songs, and that one hit the spot.
All right. So first up, we are gonna go. This is a movie I haven't seen, but I love the poster. It's a very stern-looking George C. Scott, and it is 1971's The Hospital.
Yeah, this is written by Patty Chayefsky, who wrote Network. So even though the poster does look like that George C. Scott's just going to yell at you the whole time, and he does some yelling a little bit, but it's it's a weird, it's an absurd, zany thing, like Network is. It's about a week in the life of a place that just goes completely off the rails into craziness. And
you know what it's not? You know what George C. Scott, he might do a little bit, but not a lot of in this one.
You wanted to know about the man in cell 11.
Stretch your memory. What was he wearing when they brought him in? Do you recall?
That was quite some time ago.
Was he dressed like a priest?
Like a priest?
Were there any signs of injuries, blood, lacerations?
That would be in the file.
It is not in the file. It is not.
Thank you, George C. Scott.
It is not in the file. Yeah, that's another guy in a hospital of a different sort.
Yeah.
This hospital is kind of a lot like that one, actually. It is sort of full of crazy people and big personalities. It's a Manhattan hospital. And it's hard to explain, you guys. I don't know if you've seen Network, you sort of know what I mean. I mean, it starts out, it feels like a straight story, and it takes enough of the situation straight that you can really start throwing in weird stuff, and it doesn't make you it doesn't repel you from the story. It just keeps getting more and more intriguing. Lovely Diane Rigg stars in it with him, and there's this great parade of character actors, very memorably Richard Dysart. Richard Dysart's was on LA Law for years. He was the senior partner on that show, and he's just in the 70s cinema and early 80s cinema. He's just in tons of stuff.
Yeah, he's all over the place.
And he's great in stuff, and especially when he gets to go a little over the top, like in The Thing, he gets to kind of let loose and be in a crazy horror movie. And in this film, he gets to he just has this growing panic that turns into mania at one point. And it's sad to watch, but it's really fun to watch an actor doing that. Especially one that's such a cool, like, customer early going in the film. Basically, it's a whole bunch of things. There's not a real narrative strung together. If there is one, it's that people are dropping dead in a hospital, which isn't that weird. So no one's thinking too much about it.
And not of patients. It's
of patients too, but that's the thing. They're the red herrings. It's these doctors that start dying, and of really weird circumstances, and one of whom is really, really young, and it's I don't want to sell it as a mystery, because that isn't what it is, but it's the reason it turns out that that's happening is one of the craziest reasons you will ever hear. And it's urban. It's what Patty writes best. It's this urban, smart people madness, but they're surrounded by this madness, just trying to sort of hold things together, or they come to the party already mad, and something happens that makes them lift off into the stratosphere of madness. Something inspires them to just go totally crazy, and I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore moment.
Right.
That this movie has that kind of thing going on too, and there are people that are trying to solve that like it's a problem, and there's people who are trying to exploit it for money, or it takes all kinds, and it's a weird film, but it's pretty great, actually. I'd never seen it, and I was pretty impressed with it.
Yeah.
And I'm glad I didn't. There's another one where it's like, I saw Network when I was a kid, and I could barely handle what it was. Again, it left an impression, so that then you read about it, and it kind of becomes something different as you grow up. But this film, if I'd have looked at it and thought it was like, a serious hospital drama, and got I'd have been, as a kid, I wouldn't have been able to handle that.
Right.
So I sort of did see it at a perfect time, because I could have very much appreciate what it was this time. So.
For someone who hasn't seen it, just a real question. The reason why all these people start dying, I just want to make sure it's not because of dolphins, right? The dolphins aren't
in this case, it is not because of dolphins putting ocean mines underneath their hospital beds.
Oh,
that blow up
yeah.
politicians.
It is not.
Although it just isn't quite as weird as that. Nothing is quite as weird as Buck Henry's script for Day of the Dolphin, but it's almost as weird as that.
Yeah.
So be warned. It
Mhm.
rises almost to that level. Yes.
All right. So next up, also from 1971, and also with George C. Scott.
Yeah, that's why they're
And
together. The
yeah,
other George C. Scott movie of 1971.
George C. Scott appears. I think he appears maybe one more time in this list here. But anyway,
he was a busy guy in the 70s. He was
oh
a
my
very,
goodness,
very
yeah.
busy leading man, and it did a lot of really interesting films, some of which I still haven't seen. You know,
Yeah.
so
And this one is not a movie about Istanbul turning to Constantinople,
it is
but
not.
it is called They Might Be
It is
Giants.
not.
It is not about any. No, this he. You know what he? This one is a Sherlock Holmes movie, but it's not a Sherlock Holmes movie. Not about Sherlock. Not about Sherlock Holmes.
That's correct.
Yeah. So this one. A little bit of trivia on this one. Written
You
by
didn't give the name yet.
Oh, no, did I not? I know I said it's
No.
They Might Be Giants.
Oh,
Yeah, They Might Be Giants. And it is this one was written as a play. It premiered in London, but never came to America. And then because the writer James Goldman just never felt like he got it right on stage, and so then they tried it for film, for screen.
it feels like a play in many ways. It expands greatly near the end of it, but yeah, it's about a asylum patient who believes he's Sherlock Holmes. And he's very, very clever, played by George C. Scott, and his doctor, played by Joanne Woodward, is trying to talk him through it. And it's about all these different mental patients that they come across. And it's about how Sherlock, as sort of a natural leader and as a guy who sees mysteries and conspiracies everywhere, rallies this whole crew of institutionalized folks to his aid in solving the crime or the whatever itself never seems terribly clear, but they go on this adventure together, and this psychologist gets sort of caught up in it. It's really fun. She there's this great scene where they have this long session together, counseling session, and she starts to try and humor him a little bit, and he's not having. He's like, "Don't patronize me. I know you don't think I'm Sherlock Holmes." Like he's too clever for that, and it makes him a really complicated patient. In a way that you'd think Sherlock would be. It's just it's very 70s in its sort of outlook of of life and stuff, and the furnishings and these apartments and stuff, but it really is a light entertainment. Truly, it I don't know what the playwright intended. There's lots of metaphorical meanings and things in it. There's some evaluation of the whole evaluating mental health process of the time, but it's mostly just, wouldn't it be neat if some clever charismatic guy thought he was Sherlock Holmes, and everyone went on an adventure together, like in a grocery store.
Right.
It's like it's fun. It's meant to be fun and kind of heartwarming and almost romantic, and it kind of is. I think Joanne Woodward has very mixed feelings about the film, because her character I really think is where the film falls down. And Woodward is, spectacular actor, really, really good. And the material doesn't stick with her in a way that is very meaningful, which is a shame. So if the playwright was struggling with it, maybe that was it. In real life, she happens to be named Watson. So.
Mildred Watson. And is he Sherlock Holmes? He's not Sherlock.
Well, don't spoil it. Maybe he is, Joel. Where's your sense?
In the file.
It's in the file. Check out the movie and you can decide for yourself. But that's where the film let me down. I was like, wow, she just sort of, what's interesting about movies like this is that tension between two different people and different philosophies, and hers, it sort of dissipates and disappears as the film goes on. And that doesn't seem really, it's not that she doesn't go along with him. It's that her skepticism, even though she never really believes him, sort of disappears, and she just kind of becomes one of his followers, which I think weakens the story. But that's pretty much it. It's very fun. It's everything they've said it was throughout the years. It's a fun, goofy movie, of which they didn't, that was the exception to the rule in 71. I have to say, when you look at the big hit movies of the era,
right,
the fun night out on a town date movie was like not the kind of films they were making. So
right, you'd go to a thriller for a date, like some sort of, there are lots of
so this really is a different, it's a different kind of thing in a maybe more, in a more modern way even. So because this is the kind of story they would do today, I think.
Right. So the next film, I meant to ask you about before we started, because I was having difficulty locating it anywhere. The Spitfire Gang.
Spitfire Gang. That's out on Blu-ray. Maybe it's not streaming anywhere.
Well, I mean, I literally couldn't find it. I couldn't find it on IMDb or anything.
Really?
Yeah.
Maybe I spelled it wrong or got the name wrong. I've only watched this the one time. Let's look it up. Maybe it's not Spitfire. It's which would make it hard to find. Sorry for the loud typing. My my keyboard is right next to my it's going to be called something totally different. So I probably typed it in wrong for you. Okay. Because that doesn't feel like the right name. Spitfire Gang. Well, that'd be a cool name for a movie.
Well, yeah. I mean, it has been the title of a name, but like there was a movie in the 20s and the 50s called the Spitfire Gang, and I'm like, wow, that doesn't fit into our little.
Well, and now, because normally I'd be able to say, oh no, I meant this, but now because I got the wrong name in my head, I can't fix it. But it's going to be a totally different name. You wait and see.
Not the word,
but something that sounds like that.
And not the Spitfire Grill.
No, Spikes. Not even Spitfire. The Spikes Game, 1974.
The Spikes?
Yep. Lee Marvin plays a character named Spikes.
The Spikes Gang. There we go. Yeah.
That's total. I mean, that's not me thinking it's called that. I was a total typo at the time. Sorry about that.
All right. Well, here we go. In case for editing purposes. So the next
let everybody.
Sorry, everybody. You got a little bit about how the sausage is made. All right, 1974.
You can all suffer through that. It only took a minute to figure out.
1974 is the Spikes Gang. Lee Marvin. Ron Howard in this one. Yeah.
Charles Martin Smith.
Oh yeah, look at them. Yeah. So.
Ron Howard and Charles Martin Smith, famously from American Graffiti. I mean, Ron Howard obviously is famous for everything, but those two guys are famously paired up also in American Graffiti, which I think came out before this. So this is a little like the people from St. Elmo's Fire, like going back to high school for 3 years and all those other crappy movies that came after. Because they're aged down quite a bit in Spike's Game, which is strange. You see them graduating high school and the year before in pretty much one of the biggest films of the 70s. And then here they're kind of kids who are running away from home, and they start stealing to it's basically to live, to eat, to have money and stuff, because it's kind of it's a Western. And they hook up with this dude played by Lee Marvin. And whenever you've got Lee Marvin in a movie, I mean, it's he's a commanding presence, and he takes them under his wing, and they do a bunch of crimes together, and they camp together, and they learn how to shoot people. And Um, Charlie Martin Smith. I don't know if you guys know him. If you don't, it's important that you do. If you don't know him, he especially during this era, but even as he aged in things like Starman and Untouchables,
Yep.
he's has an innocence about him. And, you know, he's like an innocent. It's hard to explain, but whatever you layer on that guy, because in real life, he's this sort of wicked, humorous, sort of kind of amazing dude. But he, in this film, you know, he just, some guy runs up and frightens him while he's robbing a bank and he just kills him. And it's that kind of movie. It's like, if you, and it's great that it's that way. It's like, this is going nowhere good. You know what I mean? This is all going to break down. They're not going to keep doing this. You know, it's got that fun Western outlaw kind of feel to it, but you can just tell the storytelling is very straight with you, just in even just the way it feels, the atmosphere of it, that this can't end well. This sort of life, you know, it takes that part of it very seriously, if that makes sense. It just, you know, so even though it's a pretty light movie where you got the grizzled old veteran, you know, teaching the plucky young kids stuff, the main kid in it, I don't know from really anything else.
Gary
What's his
Grimes?
name, that actor?
Yeah, Gary
Huh?
Grimes. Gary
Yeah.
Grimes.
He's good in it. It's the three of them, and he's the one that has to kind of be he's the one that runs away for a reason, and he's the kind of tortured soul of the film. And whereas Howard and Charlie are just, woo, where are we going? What are we doing? Which honestly makes it, you know, even worse. Although Ron Howard character sort of splits the difference. He's not a tortured soul of a character, but he's clever and he thinks their way out of things throughout. So he kind of keeps the thing going. But you're all just, the whole movie, you're like, just go home, you know,
Right.
Go home.
Gary, I'm just real quick here. Gary Grimes,
don't go to Mexico. Go home.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the main kid in it, he really believes there's no home for him anymore. And he's propelled by that. And that makes it sad. It truly is a tragic story that has a lot of fun stuff along the way. So it's interesting.
Gary Grimes, just real quick here. I mean, he burst on the scene in Summer of '42. Another really great flick that maybe we'll make another list at some point. But and then he was essentially done with his acting career by '76.
Interesting. That happens sometimes.
Yep, he did one TV show in 1983, one episode of Matt Houston in 1983. But other than that, essentially, well, he did one episode of Gunsmoke in '67. But so from '60, so he had, you know, but his '71.
Yeah, but his whole list is rather sparse, and even though it's punctuated with some interesting things, he kind of that happened.
Yeah,
I mean, it happens there. You look back, we were talking last summer about Jaws 2, and some of those kids are still working today, and some of them, none of them just only did Jaws 2, but some of them just had this career trajectory where it was like, you did stuff at the time, you had an agent, they got you on this show or that show and this thing or that thing. And then you just poof, you just kind of you went, you know, it happens in the theater, right? It happened to me kind of on a small scale. You just sort of don't do that stuff anymore.
Right.
It's because life intervenes, you know, you fall in love with somebody, you move to Phoenix, you just get tired of doing it. You know, you get tired of casting calls. If you're a woman in particular, you just don't like that anymore. You kind of don't subject yourself to it anymore, really.
Yeah.
And when they stop calling, you're done. So or sometimes people are just like, oh, okay, I'm going to college now or whatever. That was like the kid who plays kid in Batman Begins, played Joffrey in Game of Thrones. He just, I'm going to go be a scientist. It's been fun. See ya.
Yep.
You know?
Yep.
So sometimes it's not circumstance. It's you decide that was neat, but now I'm going to go do this instead. So It's good. The kid's good with horses, like good with guns. It's all has a great deal of verisimilitude. It's called the Spikes Gang, not the Spitfire Gang. I wish I could go back and rename it for them, but
Yeah, I should have. I didn't even think, because we both were kind of like, oh, it's 2:30. We got to get going. I should have thought of that before we started.
whatever. Spikes Gang. It's good. If you
Yeah.
like westerns, it's good. If you like family movies that have some intense content, it's not like a intense R-rated movie or anything, but it means business once it gets going. So but it's still very, very entertaining, and the bits that were sad were very sad. It was good, and Lee Marvin's really, really good in it, because he's really seen from the kid's perspective, and you have to see it to see what I mean. He just is really even keeled and very. He's a guy who was them a long time ago, and is an older man now, and is still going. And he's had to make some ruthless, kind of awful decisions over that time to survive, I imagine. And it's cool. It's cool how they learn those lessons throughout the movie. So.
All right. Next up is
that's only movie number 3. I gotta talk faster.
Yeah. Well, some of these we're gonna, some of these coming up, like I said, we're gonna be able to kind of fly through a little bit because they're not really available to watch, and I haven't seen them for many years. So, but next up we have Juggernaut, Richard Lester film from 1974.
2 Richard Lester films in a row here. We've talked about Juggernaut. We said its name during the disaster movies, and we brought it up quickly as it relates to Ian Holm. On our Ian Holm countdown, which it didn't make. But Juggernaut's an amazing movie. It's about an ocean liner, the Britannic, that has a bunch of bombs placed on it. And it's about Richard Harris plays this head of this bomb squad who gets helicoptered out there, and they're in the middle of a storm. So it's all very dramatic, and they can't get the people off into the escape boats or whatever you call them. Which is weird, because wouldn't a storm be exactly the time where you would need to do that sort of thing?
Right.
It's just like, oh, we got, we're going down in the storm, but don't get on the lifeboats because it's too stormy. So I guess you're just going to die here now. It's just weird. It's weird, the justifications they felt they had to come up with to keep people on the boat. These days it'd be like, I can see everything that's happening. And if you try and make one person escape, there's a scene in every hostage movie where some poor person has to bite it because they're kind of not following the terrorist rules. This movie, like, it bends over backwards to try and think of reasons why you shouldn't do that stuff, instead of just having the bad guy have a little more control over what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
But it's good, man. Ian Holm, Julian Glover, Anthony Hopkins, all are in this same scene together. It's a stunning scene full of like this immense talent. And what's one of my favorite moments in the movie is Ian's like explaining everything. He plays a guy who works for the ocean liner, and he's standing amongst all these cops, and he's like, well, and at the end of it, he goes, and he's very twitchy and weird. Ian just loads this dude with all kinds of mannerisms and things that are not necessary, but are still fun to watch in the hands of a capable actor like him trying to make an impression. And whereas Anthony Hopkins just stands really still and barely makes a facial expression the entire thing. So he's, which I don't know, again, it works great. It's perfect. Like, it's this perfect cocktail of how British actors work, right? And Ian gets to the end of his thing. He's like, and I just want to say we really appreciate the cooperation of the police and all this stuff. And Hopkins, they cut to him and he's smoking a cigarette. And he's like, yes, well, my wife and 2 children are on board the Britannic. And he kind of walks away without even frowning. And Holm, they cut to him and he goes, it's huge.
Yeah.
But it's Dick Lester, it's a guy who made Hard Day's Night and Superman 3. So it's so And yeah, exactly. And we talked about him last week. The Three Musketeers films from around this era.
Yeah.
So it's cool. The hugeness doesn't harm the film at all. It's a goofy hostage movie. The hospitality officer, I can't remember the actor who plays him, but his attempt to entertain everybody while they're waiting for these bombs to either explode or not explode is very fun. The group of passengers are unusually philosophical, and Richard Harris is he's into it. When he's drunk and doesn't know what he's doing, he's an interesting actor. But when he's into it and focused and wanting to do well, he's really as good as anybody of his generation. So this is a film where you could feel it. He showed up, and the bombs, like there's all this sort of, the movie was famous at the time. This doesn't make a big impression on me when I'm watching it, but they had these cameras where they could get inside the bombs and you could see all the inner workings of them and stuff, which is really cool. But by today's standards, I'm not sure how cool it is, but that's when I go back and read older people today, like writing reviews and stuff about it on Amazon or whatever. They're all like, and you're like inside the bomb and all that. And I was like, oh yeah. I see that.
Yeah, I was gonna say you probably didn't see anything like that up until
that was the photographic sort of innovation of the film. So Juggernaut's fun.
Cool. A couple of years later, Richard Lester makes Robin and Marion.
Omar Sharif is in it. It's got this huge cast.
Oh yeah, yeah. The cast of Juggernaut is yeah. I mean, it's when we did our disaster film. All these disaster films always had these giant casts, and it's like Anthony Hopkins, Shirley Knight, Freddie Jones, David Hemmings. It's
Freddie, another actor not afraid to throw it out there.
Right. Right. So a couple of years later, Richard Lester makes Robin and Marion, which is Robin as in Robin Hood, Marion as in Maid Marian. But this time they're a little bit older. A
little bit when you think about it.
Yep. And have they gotten a little wiser? I don't know. Not really.
Certainly Little John did not get wiser.
No, Little
Sean Connery plays Robin returning from the Crusades as an older man. I assume I don't know, because he kind of returned from the Crusades, the second Crusades in the first place. So they just sort of tweaking the story a little bit. All Robin Hood's adventures happened before he went off to the Crusades this way. And he's been sort of disappeared. Marion, played just lovely by Audrey Hepburn, has joined a convent. And then you got the crazy drunk guys to fill it out. Robert Shaw played, apparently, according to Denholm Elliott's daughter, after his death, where she just started spilling the beans on all the movies her dad had been in. He's like, Sean Connery and Audrey Hepburn, she came out of retirement to do it. She'd been raising her family. Because Dick is a very lovely, friendly, polite English guy who, is very persuasive. And Connery was like, oh, you should do this. This was like Connery's post-Bond starring roles. They quickly diminished to the point where he couldn't get work because he didn't have a lot of hits after Bond, and in a weird sort of David Caruso like way, like he got a couple big movies after he quit his big job, and then they didn't make a lot of money, so it's like, all right, sorry, see ya. He required like people's charity a lot. We talked about in Zardoz, he lived in John Borman's guest room while he was shooting that just to save money. So that's just right around the corner. But he's great as an aged Robin Hood. Really, really great. In fact, it's one of my favorite Connery roles. Hepburn's great. Robert Shaw as the Sheriff of Nottingham was fantastic. Robert knows not to, unlike Jaws, where he just sort of takes over the movie when he's on screen. He knows, he gets that this guy, the joy of him is in his sort of the comfort he has with his power and his sort of snarky remarks before he cuts somebody down.
Yeah.
He's a very cool customer in the film, which is great because there's some other over actors in it. The King, Richard, the Lionheart is played by Richard Harris, who is clearly inebriated in every scene that you see him.
Mm-hmm.
This is one where he's not taking it very seriously, but he still just starts shouting and goes crazy, and he's throwing servants around, and it's a fun kind of extended cameo by him at the beginning of the film. And best of all probably is Nicole Williamson as Little John, man.
Yep.
Denholm Elliott plays Old Will Scarlet, and there's some other recognizable faces, but
Ian Holm
Williamson is Connery's sidekick, and does a really nice job, because again, Nicole Williamson's he's a crazy man, and apparently those three guys in the same movie, especially when Harris was around, was like they were tough to control. But it was good. It's fun.
It is a really fun movie. I like
it's very romantic. It's almost a romance first. That's all Robin's really concerned with. He doesn't really want to get into politics and adventuring and all that. He just wants to find the love of his life now that he's survived the Crusades somehow miraculously, and wants to settle down in his castle and just be a guy. And of course it can't really work out that way. The resolution to it is, I've seen it 3 or 4 times and I'm always like, I still don't really get what you guys are talking about. Right.
Yeah.
And I guess I think I never will, and you might not either, but I think it's something where you got to go, there's metaphor here, and there's stuff working here that you got to look for that instead of trying. Same with Juggernaut, all the reasons you can't leave the boat. It's like, just roll with it. Just don't get hung up on that stuff, because it's not really what the movie is, But it is I have to say it's an odd ending. It's weird, but not for a 70s movie, but
no,
by today's standards, it would not get past one single studio executive, let alone a boardroom full of them. I can assure you. So it's,
this is very, I would agree with you. This would not make, one after one.
I don't think it's a bad ending. Tonally, it's beautiful. The music's beautiful. It doesn't bear scrutiny very well, in my opinion. That's all.
All right. Next up is 1971's A New Leaf, which this one was a new film for me. But
for me too. I'd never heard of it.
Yeah, I was really intrigued by it as I was looking at some 70s films, trying to refresh my memory for this. I saw this one, written, directed, and co-starring Elaine May of Nichols and May. And it is this weird little
Ishtar fame is what our buddy Michael would say. That's sort of mean though to bring up that.
But and this is a weird little romantic comedy. With Walter Matthau playing the lead and the main guy in it, who is this absolute. He's a trust fund kid who's never had a job in his entire life.
Oh, like Arthur, except on a slightly smaller scale. Yep,
and he runs out of money, and his there's a great scene. I got the guy who plays his lawyer. I think it's. Who is I think it's William Redfield as his agent, and
that would make sense.
Or as his,
I can't
his
help
lawyer,
you because I haven't seen it.
As his lawyer, and he was like, you asked me, because Walter Matthau goes in, he has this $6,000 bill that needs to be paid, that was, that they said this, you need payment on this, and he goes to his lawyer, and his lawyer's like, you asked me that, you told me you wanted to live on $200,000 a year, and I told you you had $100 or $90,000 a year, and I told you could not do this, and he just is explaining bankruptcy, and Walter Matthau the entire time is very clearly listening, and then he goes, "This bill needs to be paid. This bill needs to be paid," and the lawyer's like, you don't have the money to. It's really great, and it's Walter Matthau really understated Walter Matthau. I'm used to sort of seeing him.
It's fun when he takes, because he's. I saw this in a documentary the other day. I can't remember what movie it was, but it was after one of these movies where he was offered the lead role in something and he turned it down. And the casting agent who was doing the interview was like, I think Walter wanted to be a leading man, but he was scared to be a leading man. Like he knew his thing when he would show up as part of an ensemble and in a supporting role, because he was such a strong personality. But you watch these films, Taking a Pelham 1, 2, 3, Bad News Bears, what you're describing in this, when he was the main character in a film, he really does play it straight and play it real. It's not that his humor or whatever isn't there. And this is this is before he became an old man and just was in old man joke movies. This era here, I think you see that time and time again from him. You see him really bring a lot of personal stuff to each part, and I think he knew he was a good enough actor to know to do that, but I think I don't think that was a super comfortable process for him,
Well, yeah.
Which is why he kind of after each one of these, he kind of runs back and does 2 or 3 of these other little sort of crazy guy parts.
This one, what works about his, like you said, he wants to be a leading man, but he's not. The idea, the plan for this guy is he just needs to find a woman who's incredibly rich and marry her, so that he can get back to his lifestyle that he. So
it's like a 18th century costume drama in that way.
Kind of, yeah. And he ends up meeting Elaine May's character, who's Henrietta. Walter Matthau is Henry, and he meets Henrietta, and she is this botanist who is completely oblivious to everything in the world around her except for her plants and stuff. But she's insane.
I don't think I've ever seen Elaine May in like a major role. I've seen her pop up here and there and this and that, obviously, because she's got comedy performance credits up the wazoo from back in the day. But I think once she became a writer and got into the film industry, it was more behind the camera stuff. So is she good?
This is, she's really good. She's lovely. She's just this kind of quirky nerd of a woman who's seemingly and just an innocent, a naive innocent, but in a really winning, charming way. And like in a lot of things, Walter Matthau's character thinks this is perfect. I can just sort of bowl right on over her and get everything. But if she legitimately falls in love with Henry.
I'm totally getting this movie now. I get this. I know what this kind of movie is.
Yeah, it's lovely now, and it's got like this whole it's got a whole subplot where like James Coco plays his uncle.
Yeah, I love James Coco.
Great scene between Walter Matthau and James Coco. There's
more of a Broadway actor than a film actor, but when he's in movies, he's so fun.
There's a whole plot line with Henrietta's lawyer and this whole cast of characters that works in Henrietta's palatial mansion that she spends like.
We don't need to know every plot line,
but so it's really it's a weird little quirky film that's quite lovely. And you want, obviously you're invested and you want it all to work out for these guys, even though they got themselves into this situation based not really on purest motives. Like that's cool. That sounds fun. And I will say you don't, it's not like after everything is said and done, Walter Matthau's character realizes he does love her. It's not that. But it is a very sad, it's a satisfying romantic ending. but in a very quirky, weird way.
Cool.
Yeah, I had never seen it before. I'd never heard of it before. And I'm like, Elaine May wrote and directed.
Where'd you watch it?
Where did I watch it? I think I watched it on Pluto TV.
No.
Which is a free a free streaming service.
Pluto.
Yep. But all right, yeah. So next up is 1977's. We're gonna jump ahead a few years, and talk about Julia.
Yeah, and I'm only going to talk about Julia briefly. Julia is most famous for Jason Robards won the Oscar for playing Eugene O'Neill in it, I want to say, the playwright. You'll have to look that up for
Dashiell
me.
Hammett. Dashiell Hammett.
Oh, he played Dashiell Hammett in. Oh, that's even better. Sorry, they're not exactly the same guy. Either way, he played a famous actual real life actor. He's barely in the movie, and he won an Oscar for it. It's Jane Fonda's story about how she goes on this trek to is it Germany or Poland? Boy, I shouldn't even have put Julie on the list. It's been so long since I've seen it.
Yeah, it is.
Read the synopsis so that I can not be just making up what it's about.
Sure, it is. It's a Holocaust period drama. And it's about the author Lillian Hellman's alleged friendship with a woman named Julia, who fought against the Nazis in the years prior to World War II. Right,
and they stopped corresponding, and this is post World War II, and she goes on this, she gets whisked away. She goes on this adventure essentially to find her, and meets all kinds of weird people along the way, and gets some help, and has some people chasing her and stuff. It's not a thriller though, like it sounds. These are like literary people, and it's a rather subdued film, but it's lovely. You know what I mean? It's a smart sort of investigation of these sorts of topics without all the sort of Holocaust and without all the histrionics that we bring to it. When we make a movie about this sort of subject, it would be full of flashbacks. You get the whole horror of the thing. Like, this is all with it. You learn about this stuff, people's experiences, through their conversations and through her interviewing all these folks. Early role for Meryl Streep and Lambert Wilson and a whole bunch of actors that are, pretty commonplace in films today. All have little sort of supporting roles in it. And it's pretty good. I don't want to dwell on it too much since it's been a while since I've seen it. But
yeah, I gotta admit, it's weird. I've never seen this movie.
I believe it's based on a true story, but I don't want to go that far.
Yeah, it was up for a gajillion awards. It won for Jason Robards won, Vanessa Redgrave won for Best Supporting Actress.
I believe it.
It was picketed.
Star Wars, Annie Hall. I mean, it would obviously 77 was a loaded Oscars, but a very weird and diverse one. So this is a film that got a lot of attention at the time because of its serious subject matter and because of its, Robards, Jane Fonda. It just has this. This is the classy Oscar bait movie of its era, and it's not as good as its reputation from that era suggests. But it's true. It's considered one of those. Wow, how did this get all these awards and stuff? Jason Robards only in one scene. You know what I mean? It's like people talk about it like, Annie Hall and Star. I don't remember the other 77 movies, but there were really high profile films that came from that year. So this isn't one of them. And that part is rightfully so, but it's still much, much better than something you can simply dismiss. So I kind of wanted to give it a little love.
Sure. Yeah. All right. Next up is this movie, such a good film, but it's been a very, very long time since I've seen it. The Goodbye Girl, 1977. Neil Simon.
The first or the second of the Herbert Ross directs Neil Simon movies, and I think largely the most popular. I think is this also 77?
Yep, this is 77.
That's why they're there together, I guess, because there's no other real connection. Goodbye Girls, really fantastic film. Again, this is the third of which, assuming we can put a new leaf in this category, but this is just a fun romantic movie about two people who get stuck renting the same apartment due to weird circumstances that I won't really get into. And because they're both kind of desperate and because they're both nice enough folks, they sort of agree to share it and become roommates. This is really like a setup for a sitcom, and it has a very sitcom feel to it. Neil Simon writes, really, really fun. But his wife at the time, the actor who was in a bunch of these films, what's her name?
We're talking about Marsha Mason?
Yeah, Marsha Mason.
Sorry, I was looking at something and I didn't quite catch your question.
It's my favorite Marsha Mason role. The guy's played by Richard Dreyfuss. He's fantastic in it as well. Richard Dreyfuss is, he can really make your movie, or he can really drag it screaming to the ground.
Yep.
And it's not really because of him. It's just because of the way he is. He's a unique cat. And he's great in it, and the two of them have this sort of lovely chemistry, as you all like to say out there in the world, that doesn't understand any sort of technical or method acting techniques. You call it chemistry. I think that really lives in this film and makes it. And the other star of the thing is the teenage girl or whatever, the little girl that can't remember her, but she was in a handful of movies around this time.
Quinn Cummings.
She's great. She's great at it. And it's all very Neil Simon dialogue-y, and it has this great mood and everything to it. And there's a lot of fighting and bickering and arguing, which can get on your nerves like really quickly if it's not just handled just right. And Herbert gets that down just like he did in Secret of My Success. Sean, I remember that one. That's a Herbert Ross movie. She does. Shauna, one of our favorite guests, not a fan of the show, so she won't hear that. So that's no problem. She's got 2 beagles and way too much going on in her life to be listening to us each week. But Herbert Ross, what's the other Neil Simon one you really love? The Max Dugan Returns, another Jason Robards movie. These guys paired up on a bunch of films, and they're all kind of great. But to me, this is the signature one. It's my favorite Marsha Mason performance probably ever. So.
Yeah, I mean, let's see. This is just a list of the Neil. He does 4 in a row here. Chapter 2, The Goodbye Girl, California Suite, and I Oughta Be in Pictures. And then
California Suite, not so good. Those other ones are great.
Oh, he directed the play of Chapter 2, the play of I Oughta Be in Pictures, and then directed the film of I Oughta Be in Pictures. And then does Max Dugan Returns. So he and Neil Simon were attached at the hip for several years there. Okay, let's move on. Have
you seen that, haven't you, Joel? Goodbye Girl.
Oh yeah,
it's got that great song, David Gates from Brad. Goodbye doesn't have to mean forever. I won't sing it because I don't want Elektra Records come knocking down my door, but it's a great song. Like it just has all that fun stuff that movies like that used to have. They didn't have 12 songs and 18 montages. They just had the one song that was written for the movie. It made an impression. It's like I sometimes I get bored with those stories, but sometimes I long for those days where it really was about these folks and the setup. You had to have it, but it wasn't even that important. It was about the fireworks that happened between people. That's fun to me. So
right. Yeah, no, I love The Goodbye Girl. All right, next up is 1974. So this is quite a hard turn from a lovely romantic comedy, Neil Simon romantic comedy. Would that it be that Neil Simon wrote Death Wish? But he did not. Death Wish, 1974, Charles Bronson.
Yeah, it's interesting. The big criticism of Death Wish, well, other than that people were all concerned that it would promote vigilantism and murders on the street, which it it actually did to some degree, to a small degree. It's funny watching a movie with that title that has that reputation with to today's eye, because it's a very quaint little movie. Bronson, unfortunately, it's a fantastic performance by him. It's a shame that he is just ridiculously miscast, because when he sees Charles Bronson show up in something, you really do expect him to just start killing people right away.
Yep.
Why do we need this elaborate sort of revenge, like psychological setup for Charles Bronson to start kicking ass? You don't need it. That's why we showed up to see Charles in the film at all.
Mm-hmm.
But he's great. He's this architect, sort of urban planner type guy, he plays it. He plays it great. He's a good actor, but it's a stagey performance. And he wears these like orange tinted Robert Vaughn style glasses indoors. And It's like Michael Wimmer, the guy who directed it, who I'm not a fan of because he's one of the world-class dicks of all the movies, but this is his best movie. We talked about him in our 70s horror-thon back a couple years ago, if you really want to go hunt that one down. He made a film called The Sentinel that we talk about in there. What are you letting him wear those glasses for? I mean, it just makes him look like he's a sharpshooter already.
Yeah.
So there's just these decisions that were made that were wrong. But once he's out losing, it's a story about a guy who this terrible thing happens to his family, and it really is terrible. And it's a movie that's clever enough that it's not about the guy getting revenge on the people who hurt him and took those lives from him. He doesn't know who those are. We're never going to find out who those people are. You know what I mean? He gets armed somehow by some weird coincidence and finds himself in facing a mugger while he has a gun on him that you'd never have in his normal life. And he just, like Indiana Jones, man, he just shoots the guy. And it's inhuman, and it's weird and cold, and it's not exciting, and you don't feel good when it happens,
Yeah.
Bronson said, he agreed to do the movie same reason he agreed to do all these violent movies that he did, because he thinks anyone with half a brain will watch them, and even if they're entertained or they're not entertained, you can't not get the message that violence begets more violence. He believes that is part of these stories, and because he was a weird David Carradine, like sort of Zen master guy.
Yeah.
He was not the tough guy of his films. And it's a shame that here he's trying to play a different sort of dude. And it's like it should have been Steve Guttenberg or something. It should have been somebody who just is some guy instead of some guy who, a minor movie star, admittedly, but a movie star nonetheless, an action star.
Mm-hmm.
Clint Eastwood couldn't have played this role, and yet he might have even been slightly better.
Right.
And it sucks because he's given it his all, and the movie is interesting, but I guess I won't say much more about it than that. Yeah. He guns down a whole bunch of people, becomes a celebrity. Nobody knows who he is, but he becomes the vigilante killer, and it's in the news and everything. And it has a ton of crappy 80s sequels put together by the Cannon Film Group that are all garbage. But this movie is sort of a thoughtful movie if you don't mind living through the horrors early on. It's really weird. And plus, two of the thugs who commit this crime on his family's unforgivable crime are played by two super famous looking people. One of them is Jeff Goldblum, who he's like a foot taller than the other two guys. And so he keeps having to kind of contort his body to get in frame. You know what I mean? That's funny, but their actions in the film are terrible. Yeah. So it really is horrific and really gross. So just heads up.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll never talk about Death Wish in any other context. It's important to set a movie like that aside from it. It's a franchise, It's important to set it completely aside from the films that followed, because it's nothing like those. It's a significant film of this era, I think.
Yeah, I'm seeing, but watching. Okay, yeah, no, I was gonna say it says that there was an urban legend that Denzel Washington made his film debut in this, but I'm looking here. No, it was not him.
No, he wasn't even acting then.
Yep. All right. Okay. Next up is
there is a guy who looks. I watched out for it. There's a guy who looks a lot like Denzel Washington that pops up in it. He actually looks more like John David Washington, but nevertheless, you go if you're looking for it, you're like, wow, that does look like him. Just like the guy who looks like Michael Bolton in Dune, man, he looks a lot like Michael Bolton.
Yeah.
He's just some Mexican guy, but you can see why people thought that might have been him.
Yep. These next two films we'll go through quickly because actually they're not available to watch anywhere unless you can find old DVD versions of them. Or
cool, good. We're running out of time, so let's do it.
Next, it's 1971's Little Murders, which is the film adaptation of the Jules Feiffer play, kind of a black comedy. And I thought this one was interesting and worth bringing up. It's directed by Alan Arkin. Which
written and directed by Alan Arkin, right?
Well,
based on the play, but adapted. This was masterminded this project.
Yeah, and Elliot Gould. Just it's this sort of black comedy discussion of marriage and relationships. It's and then it's weird that there's bringing a boyfriend home to dinner and they live in like this incredibly tough neighborhood where lots of murders and shootings and stuff are happening, and
lots of social commentary and lots of dark relationship satire.
And then the next movie I want to bring up is 1975's Smile, which I just have these vague remembrances of from seeing
it's a beauty pageant movie, right?
Yeah.
At least I knew that much when I went to look it up.
It's a beauty pageant. It stars Bruce Dern, and it's just this as a
smarmy beauty pageant host, which is usually Bruce Dern's something, even if he's smarmy, he's something more earthy than that. So that intrigues. I've never seen this, but that definitely intrigues.
Yeah, and it's it's a satire comedy of beauty pageants and everything that goes into beauty pageant. A lot of things about that have become tropes about beauty pageants. But I sort of remember
there aren't many beauty pageant movies that are straight up taking the beauty pageant part seriously. They all are commenting on them in some way, even back then. So that's not surprising.
So so it's interesting. I found it, I have remembrances of it being funny and everything. It could have just been that I was a young guy and there were little girls in it, and I'm and I was like the same age as them so when I saw it. So who knows, but
that is a weird way to see one because it's about young people. I get you're saying. I didn't get that part.
It's
about kids,
not kids,
teenagers,
but like teenagers. They're teenagers in a beauty pageant.
Gotcha.
Well,
that definitely puts them. I mean, that sharpens it quite a bit more, in fact, when you do when you do that, as opposed to just 20 somethings or something. Interesting.
But the next movie that we're going to talk about is one of our
only thing worse than a beauty pageant is a beauty pageant with a bunch of underage people in it. That's even grosser and even more more
I was watching an old Mr. Show episode, and it was an episode in
objectifying was sorry the word I was trying to find.
There was an episode of Mr. Show, and the sketch that they were doing was a fetal beauty pageant. And so it was a pregnant woman.
The next obvious step.
And then they're just doing the sonogram on there, and they're judging the sonogram on the and the beauty of the fetus.
They found a way to make it even worse. Good for them. That's impressive.
The next one that we're going to talk about is one of our favorite films, and it is 1972's The Candidate.
Yeah, and I don't think, even though we love this, The Candidate is one of my 56 10 out of 10 star films. It's a near perfect movie. I don't think it benefits from a whole ton of discussion, so we'll just give you the setup, and you guys can, if you should seek this out if you can. It's also it should be easier to find than it is, but for some reason it isn't. Michael Ritchie, who had worked on campaigns and stuff, and the writer whose name I can't remember, they knew each other, and they made this movie sort of based on these real life experiences they have. Robert Redford plays the son of a famous old governor, I want to say, of California, and he's this sort of environmental activist. You know, he starts out as this kind of ex-surfer guy who wants to keep the beaches nice and cares about very liberal things. But because he's got the look of a superstar, which obviously Redford has, and because he's got this pedigree, this this political player, brilliantly played by Peter Boyle, my favorite Peter Boyle role of all time, of which there are many, many really, really good ones, which are not Everybody Loves Raymond. He's outstanding, and they sort of whisk him away, and he goes on this journey of going from being this guy who's going to do it his way and, you know, is willing to do this. It's a senatorial race, right, Joel, I believe?
Yes. I was just looking, it is the son of the California governor.
Yeah.
And yes, and it is the
senatorial race. And it's a movie about that. And it's a movie about, I don't want to say how you lose your soul in it, but how, because I really don't feel like at the end of this movie, this guy doesn't have a soul. Like his soul is not compromised by the process, but everything he stands for and believes in, and his whole way of relating people, and like it's how the process sort of kills all those things that are naturally you and turns you into an operative, turns you into part of the political machine that has to behave and talk and do things in a certain way. And that's almost more interesting than somebody who's just corrupted by the process, which I think is a rather dull thing and a less believable thing. It's the process that's corrupt. It's not the guy in this case. And of course that's perfect for Redford, because for us to stick with him, he has to maintain this kind of integrity throughout. Bill McKay, all the way with Bill McKay, or a better way with Bill McKay. There's this fantastic scene where they're driving him from one event to another, and he's just sitting in the back of the limo, completely loopy and exhausted, and repeating his little catchphrases over and over and over again. And the two guys in the front are kind of like very subtly glancing at each other and wondering if they should do anything about this. But it's fantastic. It's a political film, truly, but it's not about the politics of the era. It's about the political process of the era. And even though it's very dated and very early 70s, the ring of truth cries out in every scene. It's just fantastic film. So The Candidate, check it out. Get it out in high definition. Get it out in its original aspect ratio. Please, Warner Brothers, give that film some love. I'm sick of watching crap, hard to see versions of it. Treat it better. And maybe it's streaming in a nice version. That's possible. Warner's always making broadcast versions that it doesn't necessarily release to the public, but
now that I'm thinking of it, I want to say that it's available on HBO Max, and
would fit. It's Warner. It's all
I'd
the
have
same
to
company.
see if it's been, if it's been
it should have been somewhat restored.
Yeah. I'll have to
again, HBO is very careful about not putting quote full screen unquote versions of things on. They changed, we talked about it, they fundamentally changed From Earth to the Moon to make it more streaming friendly. So if it's on HBO Max, check it out. Maybe it's a good version of it.
It says in HD on it, so they must have done
go watch that film. Yep. That's the best film on this list, probably.
Next up is actually another really good film, though. 1975's The Man Who Would Be King.
Yeah, I won't talk about this too much either, but this is a really classic movie that you should have heard of and really maybe should have seen by now. John Huston directs Kipling's The Man Who Would Be King, starring Michael Caine and Sean Connery in a couple of British Empire fellows who decide they're going to go rogue, and that in this backwater place that they should be able to set up shop wherever they want and rule.
Yeah.
That's their plan. To just, reap the rewards of being slightly more advanced and hopefully more clever than people. But of course, no story that starts out like that ends that way. It's a satire. You kind of, in a light way, because it wants you to deal with the story seriously. So it's not a zany, crazy movie, but it has this weird comedic energy to it for what is essentially a large-scale, widescreen adventure film. And Kane and Connery are fantastic in it. They're really a good team. I mean, really, really good. And John Huston's camera, African Queen, I get it. There's Victory. We don't want to look past that. But his eye for large scale filmmaking was never greater than it is in this movie. It's just visually amazing, and it's a film I saw when I was a kid on VHS. The sides lopped off, and I didn't get it. It wasn't what I thought it was because I neither are clever enough or mature enough to understand the humor of it, which was off-putting to me. And I was robbed of all the sweeping, adventurous visuals and stuff, completely robbed of them. So I didn't really get transported either. And just as an older person, it's a really, really good film. So,
yep. All right. Next up is 1970s, The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes.
Billy Wilder.
Billy Wilder.
Who I only like one other Billy Wilder film. So I'm not what you'd call a Billy Wilder fan. I don't have patience for, I don't like Marilyn Monroe movies. I don't like crap like that. I find that to be vacuous, and I feel the cynicism when I watch it, even though Billy himself is a very, his life philosophy lacks cynicism, and that keeps his project sort of buoyant. But this was a movie he made this was like going to be an old late 60s style roadshow presentation, a 3-hour film that had basically 4 different segments in it that were adventures from the gimmick is Watson has just died in however many years, in the 20s or something. And he had this in his will that these lost tales of Sherlock Holmes that he had locked away in his footlocker in some storage facility were not to be released to the public until both he and Sherlock were gone. And they unleashed them. And these are the stories. And the stories are great, but they're not terribly flattering to Sherlock Holmes. They're the ones that didn't go right is the gimmick. Robert Stevens, it was supposed to be Peter O'Toole and somebody, but it ended up being Robert Stevens and Colin Blakely, who are both fantastic actors, but not people you would pick to star in a late 60s epic, The sad thing about this film was Wilder, finished shooting it, took a little break while they were, he oversaw the editing of each scene, which is the important part of editing. But as they were prepping it for release, he came back and they cut almost an hour out of it, 40 some minutes out of it, 2 entire sub stories. And they left in one little sub story and then basically the main story, which is sort of Sherlock Holmes solves the Loch Ness monster, which if that doesn't intrigue, then, Blakely's great. He plays a little bit of a bumbling Watson, which we've seen before, but he doesn't play sort of the fat, clueless Watson. He's super into the ladies. It's a fun take on the character that's really cool. And both Blakely and Stevens have fantastic chemistry together. They're both pals. They were theater buddies. They'd been in I don't know how many stage shows together, tons of them. And when Wilder cast Stevens, but when he couldn't find Watson, a couple people turned him down, couldn't think of anybody. It was Stevens that chose Blakely, and it was a super smart choice because it's a really fun take on the character, the likes of which really isn't in any other version. And Wilder says it was his most lyrical film, it was supposed to have an intermission and all that. It's just he was very, very proud of it, and it sort of killed his love of the movie business. when they chopped it up. It's still a very, very good movie. It hasn't been taken great care of over the years, but they found a release print in very good condition, and they've scanned it. And it goes along with the period widescreen entertainments that we're talking about, them backstage at the Russian ballet, and them traveling to the Highlands of Scotland to in the course of their investigation. Christopher Lee plays Mycroft Holmes. Christopher Lee's a heavy hitter, and he's in a lot of garbage too, obviously, but when he's in a big prestige film, we've seen it in Lord of the Rings, stuff like that. I mean, he's got a real presence. He's very powerful, and I enjoyed it. It's kind of wonderful, and I feel bad for what happened to it in it. One of the segments that got cut, it was found, but it doesn't have any audio. So they can never put it back together the way it was supposed to be, which is a shame. But
the deleted a lot of what scenes were found were restored when they did put it out on Laserdisc, and now subsequent
same restoration ported over to DVD or to Blu-ray.
You brought up the Loch Ness. I'm just quickly reading this thing about the Loch Ness.
Be careful with what you read on that. It's a spoiler alert. I know what you're talking about, the Loch Ness monster that what's the name of the guy? Wally Weavers. We talked about him when I talked about The Keep. Great old school effects guy built this huge mock-up of the Loch Ness monster that they went out to shoot on location. And on the very first night, Joel, what happened?
It sunk
to the bottom of Loch Ness.
And then, but I love that it was rediscovered in 2016
by an expedition looking for the actual Loch Ness monster.
Which brings me a lot of joy.
Yeah, they found it still sitting there. Well, I mean, where else would it be?
Yeah.
Loch Ness is the problem with it is it's famously like a quarry. It's extremely deep, like the ocean, and anything that goes in there, like it's just the depths of which you can escape to are such that it keeps that sort of legend alive, whereas it really has no reason to exist. Eventually, they built a pretty cool prop, actually, that they shot in a tank somewhere of just the head. But Wilder said of the incident, he said, some people were freaking out and stuff, but he goes, all I could think when it happened, because I saw Wally and he was sitting there like he was starting to cry, like he'd lost a relative. And all I could think was, I need to go comfort him. And that he was very calm about it because it was a big set piece in the film. And he just was like, oh, it's okay, man. Like, say that I get that sort of the really good artists that are spoken well of as people, like Billy Wilder is, have that innate sense of equaling out the room. When I'm the crazy one who is having a temper tantrum, and I'm having my temper tantrum, but when somebody else is, I'm suddenly very calm and very, like I adjust to whatever the mood is. And when I saw this, as frustrating as it was for me to see my big Loch Ness sequence just completely go to hell in just a couple minutes in front of 100 witnesses, it was obviously devastating to Wally that it happened. And all I could think of was I needed to try and cheer him up and make him feel like it was going to be okay.
Yeah.
And that made me feel like it was okay. This is lovely. Again, it's not that I don't like his films. They're not my movies. This is when you hear me rip and complain about old movies, this is the kind of thing I'm talking about. 7 Year Itch and stuff. It's like, it's all movie star bravado, and there's nothing human about it. And I just can't get into it, even though they're fun and pleasurable in their own ways. Those are not my kind of films. Private Life of Sherlock Holmes is my kind of film. So hats off to Billy and for an amazing career. And that should have been, he went on to make a few more movies throughout the 70s, but this should have been his sort of, look, I can do this too. And isn't it amazing? And it wasn't perceived like that at the time. And but its reputation has grown through the years, thankfully.
Next up, we're going to take a look at two films from another British icon, Agatha Christie. The first one is 1974's Murder on the Orient Express.
Wow, Murder on the Orient Express was much, much better than I thought it was going to be. I have to say that was a big, big hit at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But I've always read, Albert Finney plays Hercule Poirot in that, and he was a 34-year-old guy, and they had to age him up. Very subtle makeup for the era. They do a nice job of that, but that was always a complaint that Finney was sort of impenetrable, and the all-star cast was like the movie was dull. Same criticisms leveled at the Branagh remake from just, and it is very much a remake rather than a readaptation. It very much understands what that other film was, in ways. I like them both, because neither of them did I get bored with. And I watched this one, the first one, the earlier one, after the more modern, glitzy, glamorous take. Because say what you want about Murder on the Orient Express by Branagh, but it's beautiful. I mean, it is a gorgeous movie. And that's just his mustache. Just his mustache.
The widescreen. You need to see it in widescreen, if for no other reason than Branagh's
to capture the full scale of the mustache. It's funny, Agatha Christie got to see this film and loved it. She hated her film adaptations and refused to give the rights to them. And she gave the rights to this one because a guy who was a film producer at the time was the cousin of the Queen, and he came to her home unannounced. And because of who he was, and because he asked really, really nicely, she allowed that to happen. But it really took royalty to come to her door. She's a quintessential English woman. She's if you want to say Agatha Christie's obviously an incredible English woman. She's beyond just, but at her heart of hearts, the Duke of what's it, wherever wants to turn my book into a movie. Well, who am I to say no to that person? That's kind of a fun side story.
Lord Mountbatten of Burma.
But the most amazing thing about it is it's directed by Sidney Lumet, who made Dog Day Afternoon, an American who made these gritty street stories or legal dramas and stuff. It's like, it's made by the guy who, how could he be the one that asked to do this? And because it is, I can see why it is boring, because you have all these crazy actors, Ingrid Bergman, Sean Connery again, Michael York, great over actor that we love and adore. A parade of red herrings, if you will, all of whom play this material really, really straight. Even Richard Widmark plays it straight, which I've never seen that before in a film. That's Sidney Lumet's touch. He wants these scenes to play out believably. He didn't want it to turn into a cheesy, vampy, thing, and it doesn't. And because it doesn't, some people say it's boring. I say, no, that's where the heart of the thing is. The film works because he keeps it all in check. He refused to have a wider train built to fit the cameras in it. He's like, no, we need to make it impossible for the cameras to shoot this stuff. You need to feel that claustrophobia when you're watching the movie. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they were brilliant enough to say, even though this is a murder mystery, we want the score to be buoyant and adventurous, and we want it to celebrate the lavishness of the era, which also brings this whole different personality to the film that it wouldn't otherwise have. Lumet says that, he doesn't think it's his best directing job, but he said it was necessary for him to do it. He said he didn't think he could have directed Network if he hadn't made Murder on the Orient Express, because it taught him so many things that he wouldn't have learned if he'd have stuck in his wheelhouse. And I really, really like it for that reason. Death on the Nile. Sorry, Joel, if you had a segue lined up.
Nope, I did not. Just other than clearly the success of Murder on the Orient Express
caused Death on the Nile to be made. Death on the Nile is also been made by Branagh, so he made a sequel too. So these things kind of go with those things. That
different Poirot, though.
It's Poirot, right? They're both
but different Poirot playing
different actor, Peter Ustinov.
Yep, Peter Ustinov.
And not on a train, on a boat. So that's And of course, the details of the murder are different. Death on the Nile is not nearly as good, but it is good. It is pretty good. Directed by John Gillerman, who's a really talented filmmaker. Not a real celebrated one, but a real talented one. And actually, Gillerman's gone now, so this didn't work before. But come to our Facebook page if you're watching this on YouTube or if you're listening to it on Google or whatever. Tell us your favorite murder mystery. Just put it in the comments section of this episode. And first person to do that will PM you, and we will give you a copy of the great 1984 jungle adventure with Tanya Roberts, directed by John Gillerman, called Sheena.
Oh, Sheena.
You get a free Blu-ray copy of that. I'll pay for the postage. It comes in a lovely slipcover that is a recreation of the video cassette of its era.
Nice.
I got 2 of them, and you can have one. I know you won't do this because you people suck. I know I'm not supposed to say that either, but when it comes to, please come to Facebook, please comment, please ask us questions. You're not the best, and you know you're not. So let's face it. We do appreciate every listener, but you're falling down in this department. Here, you can win a prize, a John Gillerman widescreen adventure that's not good, but is super fun at least. So you got that going for you. So consider it.
Yeah.
Back to Death on the Nile. It's just not as good. Peter Ustinov's a little more fun, I think, than the staid performance of Albert Finney, but it's another all-star cast with way less big stars.
Yeah, I mean, well,
it's not as good a story it doesn't have as clever a solution. So it has all that, but it's a pretty good follow-up, and that's why I will just mention it here, since we're not likely to do a best Agatha Christie episode ever.
All right, well, let's talk about these last 2 films. To me, I mean, these last 2 films are pretty big films. I mean, they've had staying power. First up is Jane Fonda and Donald Sutherland in Klute.
Klute, which is often considered a conspiracy movie, and it has a little bit of a tinge of that. But Klute, I think, was made when pre-Watergate slightly. Like it's not like the other. I mean,
it's 71, so it'd be.
Yeah, it's not like the other conspiracy movies, which are very much influenced by that. There's a mystery to it, but what it really is this sort of amazing character piece that's made in and amongst a rather complicated mystery, if that makes any sense. This is my favorite. We talked about They Shoot Horses, which is stunning, but this is my favorite Jane Fonda performance, because I really feel like this is the movie from this era where there's no edifice piled on her in any way. You really feel like I don't want to say this woman is Jane Fonda. She's a model and a prostitute, and that's not her necessarily. But I really feel like we just get to the heart of who a person is when watching this performance. It is a performance, but it's so natural and just so incredible. And Sutherland, too, is a different sort of guy. This is a inspector guy who shows up because this murder happened in this woman's life, but he's it's hard to explain. This dude's like weird. He's not from New York City, where she's from, the very glamorous and the very sort of skeezy underworld of New York. He's from upstate New York or Ohio or something, and he's like he's this weird conservative born again Christian guy who finds himself, while protecting this prostitute, falling in love with her. And she is, while the murder in her life didn't seem to really knock her off her track at all, this weird dude who's like nobody else she's ever been around. Yeah. Even though to us, he's like every guy we've ever known. makes her just view relationships and stuff, just complicates her life in this incredible, amazing way. This movie was made by Alan Pakula, who made All the President's Men, who made Parallax View, who made Presumed Innocent. Really, really, really good mystery and suspense director, because he really does keep his focus even on the human element. Even though this film was shot by Gordon Willis, when I talked about Parallax View back in my lone solo episode, may it never happen again. His camera work is amazing. This film's shot with big epic cameras, like the cameras they used to make The Man Who Would Be King. And yet it's these weird interiors and stuff, which when you've got a sole person in their New York apartment and you're shooting it on a big Panavision camera, what you end up with in every shot in the film, and this is true of Parallax View to the same degree, is dead space. You end up with negative space where nothing is happening. Mm-hmm. And you have to fill that space with something, or in this case, you have to make that space, the emptiness of it, profoundly part of the storytelling. And that's what Willis and Pakula pull off in this film. Yeah. It's one of the most beautiful widescreen films I've ever seen. And I held out ever watching it because it's been treated abysmally on home video. This time last year, the Criterion Collection released a fully restored, just gorgeous widescreen print of it, which I assume is streaming someplace because it's a recent thing. It's an amazing movie. I was amazed by it. I'm not super impressed by the conspiracy part of it, really. I think that part's sort of dumb. It's the way these people affect each other. And like Joel said with A New Leaf, it's the way the film keeps it real with you, the audience, and doesn't resolve it easily, even though it resolves it satisfyingly. That's a miracle, I think. It's really, really cool. I couldn't be more impressed with a movie. This movie I gave 9 out of 10 stars. I don't know that the star rating is important. Maybe it is kind of perfect. Maybe I'll come to believe that. I came to it, movie from 71. I came to it in 2000, winter of 2020, which is a weird time, but I love it. I loved it.
Yeah, I mean, it won Jane Fonda her Academy. It won her the Academy Award,
rightly so,
and rightly so. The thing that I'm reading here, it calls it Pakula's Paranoia trilogy.
That's maybe a better term.
So just little change of word. Maybe it might be a distinction without a difference, but it
starts with her going to a casting call for models for some sort of print pictorial, a higher class gig than she gets. Some of them because she's gorgeous in it, but she's a model who makes ends meet by prostituting herself, and the way she compartmentalizes sex and that sort of thing is these scenes that she has with her shrink that are amazing monologue scenes and storytelling scenes by Fonda. It's just really, really stunning work. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's a terrific film. And you can rent it on Amazon Prime for like $3 to watch it, and it's really nice.
I can't recommend it higher. And I mean, it's definitely very 70s, but the artistry involved in making it, and yet despite how visually amazing it is and how it's got all these incredible ideas, unlike Parallax View, which as you know, I'm a huge fan of, but unlike that film, which was written by not quite as clever people who were really trying a little too hard. It has a lot of silly crap in it. Despite it being visually powerful, this film doesn't. It's got some high tension moments, but it doesn't cross that line into. It's always. You always sense the danger nearby, but because the laid back detective and because the prostitute kind of refuses to deal with the reality of that, aren't dealing with it, you're kind of not dealing with it either is very clever. It's very, very well done. So Clute, check it out.
All right, now the next movie.
Clute is the name, oddly, crazily, is the name of Donald Sutherland's character.
Yeah,
his name is Clute. That movie should not be named after that character. It should be named after Fonda's character.
Correct. It should be called Bree.
Right. It should be called Bree. I mean, maybe, I don't know. Clute is a great name. I've never met anyone named Clute. Yeah. Clute is that movie. So in that way, they found a thing, a proper name that is now their film forever. And every time you hear that, assuming it's an actual name of a person, if you meet somebody named Bob Clute, you're immediately gonna, even if you haven't seen the movie, I would immediately think of the movie.
Bob, I look forward to someday. I mean, someday
his name's John Clute, I believe, but it's it's when you have a weird last name, you got to have it as generic.
You got to go by Clute. Yep, you go by Clute.
You go by Clute.
But
and Bree also. That's again, everything about this film fits. Bree is perfect.
Yep,
it's the perfect name for this character. It's a name that in 71 or in whatever 1950, whenever this chick was born, would not have been a popular name. Maybe in France, but not here. Bree in our generation became a very popular name. I don't know that it is anymore, but I knew plenty of Brees. Yep. That's a unique thing, and everything in the film is carefully chosen. So I like that about it.
It's a cool film, and I do look forward to someday doing a deep dive on Donald Sutherland, because he's a really unique actor.
All he's got to do is just die. Joel,
I knew you were going to say that, and it still made me laugh.
Oh yeah, that was you setting up the pins for me.
I kind of thought, I was like, well, I bet Ryan will say something like this, but it's
just
still
kick
made
the
me
bucket,
laugh.
Donald, and we'll do your show. Jesus.
Oh, jeez, Don. All right, now
I don't know how we would do a show like that. Donald Sutherland is not Ian Holm. Donald Sutherland's been on 200 movies.
Yeah, he's
really, really tough to try and narrow things down. He's as good as he ever is in this. So I to get back on track, we pray for his good health. We don't want him to go anywhere, but
that's true.
He's still doing good work now.
Yeah.
But he's an interesting guy because he's a Canadian who has connections to Hollywood and Canada and England. So the films that he did, especially in this era, a lot of English films are amazing. If he were an American, he couldn't just go to England and say, "Hey, I'm in your movie now."
Yep.
But because he was Canadian, and because Canada and England are, tight, and because their union rules and all that are copacetic, unlike Hollywood's rules, or it's not really Hollywood's fault, it's more the Washington D.C.'s fault, but it's nevertheless, he's had an amazing career because of that.
All right, now this final film that we're going to talk about today, you would think it's about John Houseman, and by popular culture would show you that, or would tell you that it's about John Houseman and being a brutal law professor.
You're saying it's not about that?
Well, I mean, it is, but it's not John. It's not a movie about.
No, it's not John. It's not a John Houseman based film, man.
But it is. It is. The Paper Chase. Starring
Houseman. Wasn't really an actor, when he was a kid, he was a stage actor, but he wasn't even really a film guy. He was a stage director and sometimes playwright. And he was an extremely accomplished stage director, but not in a necessarily New York and Broadway way. Although he had his moments there, Joel will appreciate that. He was a regional theater guy who would sort of travel around, and he had connections with various, civic theaters and stuff in America, and did all this work. I don't know whose idea it was to cast him in The Paper Chase. Joel's right. It's not really about him, but
that it might as well be. I mean, that's what you remember from Paper Chase.
It's one thing for us to say, now, everyone, it's not just this, because it isn't just that, but that's the stuff that, holy cow. And even today, it's of the domineering teachers that we've had in all of our movies and stuff, are the aloof father figures that we've had. This guy just still pretty much takes the cake. It is a towering performance by Houseman. he's incredible in it. It's not just because he knows everything and not just because of the immense pressure of Harvard Law School, where this story takes place, that is put on the students, the competitiveness with each other, the this legendary guy from this crazy bygone era, because this is early 70s and these students are, some of them are, from rich families, some of them are from poor families. It takes all kinds, but they're all sort of weird in their own way. They're all sort of weird, laid back, early 70s, 20-year-olds. There's a hippie culture nature to them all, even though there's no beads or Vietnam protests, but there's still this, you want to get high, kind of chill out way of dealing with things. And so when that's contrasted, who's the main actor? Timothy Bottoms?
Yep, Timothy Bottoms.
I get my Bottoms brothers, which there's like 6 of them. I get them mixed up a little bit. Shout out to Joseph Bottoms, Black Hole, we love you. And also other Bottomses who will be named later. Tim he's the Alec Baldwin of the Bottomses.
Yep.
I didn't plan that. That just came out of me. Sometimes I enjoy myself. I apologize for laughing at my own joke. But he is. He's the guy. He's the big guy. He did these. He's not a superstar or anything, but he did these handful of where he was the main character, and they were big films. Paper Chase was not some massive runaway hit movie because it could never have been that, but it was a big hit for what it was at the time. Lindsay Wagner plays his squeeze, who also turns out to be the niece or the daughter of this professor in question. I can't remember which. Daughter, maybe.
Give me a moment. Daughter.
Yeah, daughter. And the movie's hilarious because this guy worships this dude and fears him like he fears the devil. And he's dating his daughter unbeknownst to anybody. And it's not one of those, they all show up at a dinner party together. There's nothing like that in the film. I don't think the guy ever finds out that he's dating his daughter. Or if he does it off screen, and his reaction to it, we're not privy to internally. So we're led to believe by the end of the movie that he never really learned this guy's name, even though he said it hundreds of times in class. Like these students, while they get the full professor experience, aren't really anything to him personally. It's a stunning moment, I think, if you know what I'm talking about. And it was an actor choice to say his name, but to look down at his seating chart to see what it was before he says it. It's give the man his statue. Truly, it's just amazing. But Bottoms is great. Ed Herman's in it. Ed Herman's always he's a great old aristocratic type dude these days. He was a fantastic young aristocratic type dude back in those days. He's also in our beloved Day of the Dolphin. Who's the actor, his roommate, that went on to play mean cops and stuff basically for the rest of his career, and serial killers? Read me a few names and I'll tell you who it is.
Well, there's Craig Richard Nelson.
Yeah, he's good, but no.
Robert Lydiard, James Naughton.
James Naughton's great in it, but no, not him.
And Graham Beckel.
Graham Beckel, that's who I'm talking about. Graham, this is my favorite Graham Beckel, because Graham's a guy who I can't even imagine as a young guy, and yet here he is. And he's a guy who's so intense and kind of creepy and evil and all the stuff he does as an adult, that to see him as this totally chilled out kid it's awesome. I love Graham Beckel in this film. I love James Naughton too. Their study group is just this fantastic mix of really neat personalities.
This is Beckel's first film.
I believe it.
Yep.
I believe it. And it was just his last as this type of person.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he's still a great actor, but that Hollywood found a niche for him that he's not likely to break out of very often. And why would you, when you're Hollywood actor, he's working for 30 years, whatever, but 40 years, but he's great in it. Him and Bottoms have a great chemistry together. I can't recommend it enough. It had a spin-off television show. The television show was really, really good too, but nothing quite captures the just the intensity of what it was to be a Harvard law student,
Mm-hmm.
or what it maybe still is to a lesser degree, but
again, it just made me think of another Mr. Show sketch. Sorry, just because it's been on my brain.
Yeah.
There's one where Bob Odenkirk is the teacher. It's Michael McKean at first playing and he's doing a
houseman
type guy, and then he's like, this will be the toughest course you'll ever take. And then, I need to step out for a moment. Sorry. And he steps out to take a phone call, and he's like, you, Mr. Barnes, please come up and continue in front of the class. And Bob Odenkirk gets up there, and he's like, look to your left, and now look to your right. One of you will not be here at the end of the semester, and the other will be dead. And everyone's like, wait, what? So
John Houseman, look him up if you don't know who we're talking about somehow. It's cool if you don't, but look him up and
and then he went on to, he
played just the same character for a whole bunch of movies
commercials and TV and film.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it became a little cottage industry.
Yeah, we make money the old-fashioned way. We earn it. That's his most famous voiceover commercial.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah, so that's Houseman. He was already an old man when Hollywood found him, and he was an old man for the next 10 years, and then we lost him. But despite the fact that this character is a cliche that you could do in a Mr. Show episode 20 some years later, almost 30 years later, and people would recognize it, shows you sort of how iconic a performance it is. But it is the other characters, the student characters, that hold down the story.
Mm-hmm.
Paper Chase is a near perfect film. It's just a drama. There's no special category.
Yep.
One of the students doesn't die. There's just nothing in it like that. But it's just a fantastic film that I believe any open-minded viewer will watch and get carried away by. Yeah. It's also a great time capsule, and like Clute, it's another intimate story shot with widescreen cameras, and so that captures the sense of scale of these students against the sort of Harvard, New Haven, sort of the New England backdrop, which is a big character in the film, and I dig it.
Yeah. All right, folks. Well, that is our trip down into the cinematic sounds of the 70s. You got Clute. You got the candidate. You know what we're gonna do?
We're gonna have a party.
That's right.
Inviting all our friends.
That's you. You could win Sheena.
We're gonna have a real good time.
Mm-hmm.
I hope it never ends. Makes me wanna say, didn't do.
Get yourself a Sheena. Get yourself a Sheena. All right, folks. What do they got to do to win Sheena? They got to leave a comment of what their favorite
favorite mystery is. I don't know. Just leave a comment saying I want the Blu-ray. I don't care. Just prove to me that you listen to this.
Yes, that's right.
And I said leave your mystery. I was gonna say murder mystery or Agatha Christie, but it's like, let's just, whatever. What's your favorite John Gillerman film? Mine is King Kong 1976. I don't care. Just some reference so that I know you listened, and be sure you want the movie. I mean,
yeah, because if
none of you want this in your life, then that's cool. I get that.
I remember Sheena, Queen of the Jungle, and I remember it being fun. I remember it being a lot of fun.
I've never seen it. I'm gonna watch it next week.
Yeah,
with one lucky listener.
Woohoo!
Yeah.
Play your cards right. You could do a live watch along with Ryan.
No, I'm not doing that.
Okay, then never mind.
It's got Tony Roberts in it in 1984. I'm not sure I want to be watching that for the first time with strangers.
That's true.
I won't elaborate, but it just certain things might happen. It's hard to say.
That is true. There's that.
Yep.
All right, folks. Thank you so much for joining us for this.
No show next week, so enjoy this one. And
yep. enjoy. And
you got 2 weeks to leave us a comment.
Rob Dunkelberger, feel better, my friend. And,
we love you.
Yep, we love you. Have a good week, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you for listening to The Movie Show with Joel and Ryan. Remember, all views and opinions represented in this podcast are personal and belong solely to the speaker and do not represent those people, institutions, or organizations that the speaker may or may not be associated with, unless explicitly stated. None of these views and opinions were intended to malign or deceive. And now, here's the producers, circa 1982, to play us out.